So Power BI, which started as a self-service tool or a data analytics tool, no longer remains just that. Now it is also used for complex analytics and integration with various different platforms, one of which is the Azure ML Studio. Hi all, I welcome you to this session on Azure integration with Power BI. And what follows hopefully will help you understand the integration between Azure ML Studio with Power BI and how to make the most of it. But before we begin, let's look at our agenda for today. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out by introducing you a little bit to the Azure ML Studio and then a little tour of the same, followed by which we are going to use the same platform to build a model. Now, the main objective of this particular session is to make you guys understand how to use Azure ML models with Power BI. So we are not going to go a lot into the depth of the machine learning model. It's going to be a fairly rudimentary and common one because we want to focus more on how you're going to integrate it with Power BI. All right. Next, we are going to move on to integration with Power BI before we conclude the session. So without much ado, let's get started. So the Azure ML Studio or the Microsoft Azure Machine Learning Studio, the classic version which I'm talking about, is a collaborative drag and drop sort of a platform. In certain scenarios, the UI of it is going to remind you of the Power BI desktop. It's basically a GUI-based integrated development environment for constructing and operationalizing machine learning workflow on Azure. You can use it to build, test, and deploy predictive analytics solutions on your data and get a hands-on pertaining to disciplines such as data science, predictive analytics, cloud resources, machine learning, and so on and so forth. Now, the predictions by Azure tool is extremely accurate for data and algorithms, and the results can be fine-tuned as it is extremely easy to import training data in this tool. As a web service, you can also publish your data model using this, right? So this is a platform where your data, predictive analytics, and cloud resources meet. So now that you know all about the Machine Learning Studio from Azure, let's go ahead and look at what it looks like. So the first time you log into studio.azureml.net, you will face a home page like so. You have a bunch of different Microsoft samples. We have tutorials, we have sample data sets of processing and analysis, auto imports, regression. We have a bunch of different experiment templates already. Now, when the first time you are going to log into studio.azureml.net, you will be asked to log in using your work email ID, after which you will be provided with a platform such as this. On your left, you have a couple of different options. You have projects, experiments, web services, data sets, trained models, and settings. Now, we are going to explore each of them one by one before we go ahead and create our mini machine learning model. So the first thing we're going to look at is projects. Now, this is nothing but a virtual folder where you can create and save your projects. If, suppose, just to show you, I click on create project. Let me just name it test project. And I can just enter a description called test project. I'm not going to spend much time on this. And click on the tick, which is basically okay. You can then go ahead and add assets to your projects. You can add data sets, experiments, modules, notebooks, and transformations to your project. All right, so that's about it. So next we're going to move on to experiments. All right, so this is where you're going to be creating your model. Your models are called experiments. If you click on this bottom bar here, if you click at new, you will see there are a bunch of different examples and sample experiments which are already been provided by Microsoft. If you just want to learn the tool or just add to an experiment that's already there, it's good for you. It's going to be a great learning opportunity. There are some brilliant experiments down here. But if you want to create your experiment from scratch, you can click on blank experiment and you will be given this space to work with. This is like a little workspace where you have your flowchart with vacant fields out here. It's not just a drag and drop UI service. You will have to know the structure of your algorithms, the structure of your experiment. You can make different components on your own, like write different scripts, your Python language modules, your R language modules, and drag them here. On the left, you can view a mini map of your entire project. This is a very well made platform, in my opinion. On the right, again, you can put in descriptions and properties of your project. Next, you have web services. This is the part which you're going to use to upload your work to the web services. And we are going to be using it later in this tutorial. Next, we have datasets. As the name suggests, this is basically the datasets you upload or create using this platform. Then you have the train model section. Here you're going to have the number of models that you have trained using the Azure Studio, and it has all different specifications in this. And then you have the settings where you have various different workspace settings. You have your workspace type, ID, storage, so on and so forth. All right. So we're going to go back to experiments. And this is where we are going to start out with our demo. So now what we're going to do is that we're going to start out first and foremost by clicking on new and adding a blank experiment. All right, so here I am going to upload a data set. So for the data set, I'm here in the data set panel. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down to the bottom bar, click on new, and here you get the option of uploading a data set from your local file. So I'm going to do that. And once the dialog box for uploading a new data set appears in front of me, I'm going to click on choose file. And I'm going to navigate to my training file. It's just called train. So I'm going to open it. And here I'm just going to rename it to 𝐑𝐸𝐻𝐻𝐶SV. Now, the reason I've chosen this particular file is because it's one of the most common data sets that you will find across the board. It does not matter where you download it from. The data more or less is generic and is the same. So you can find it anywhere. But despite that, I'm still going to leave this data set in the description box below. So you can also check that out for this data set. So yeah, we have the Titanic CSV file. So I'm going to go back to experiments. And here in the experiment, I'm going to click on new, add a blank experiment. And in the left-hand side pop-up pane, you have two options under Save Datasets. That is samples, which will give you all the sample experiments datasets that I had shown you prior to this, and My Datasets. So here I just have one data set which I have uploaded, the one that I have shown you. I'm just going to drag and drop it right here. It's as simple as that. On the right, you have the properties and projects column. So if I right click on the data set and select data set option, I can visualize the data set, what my data looks like. Just for a quick view, we have our passengers with their IDs. We have their survival status in binary, 0 as in not survival and 1 as in survival, successful survival. Then we have passenger class, name, sex, age, the ticket fare, cabin, so on and so forth. The best part about using a common data set like this is that you will find some or the other version of this with all the required variables and columns that we'll be using from any data source. This particular one is from Kaggle, but you can get it from anywhere. It's just a Google search away. On the right, you can even see there are options such as statistics and visualizations, which upon adding will appear on the right. So I'm going to close it. Now, if you are a data scientist or a data analyst, this is a very nice platform for you. What you can do is you can conduct data pre-processing, add transformations to your data, so on and so forth. You have a bunch of different options right here. So the first thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to go and transform my data into a more usable form so we can lay our analytics on top of it. So if I search for select in this search field right here, I'll get certain options. So basically what I want is select columns in dataset. So I'm going to drag that and drop it here. And you can also create a connection like so. And on the right, we have an option for launch column selector. So I'm going to click on that. All right. So once you launch column selector, you have a dialog box like the one you see in front of you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to only select certain columns which I will be needing for my ultimate prediction. We are, after all, predicting the survival rate of passengers, and we are going to train this data set in such a way that when we introduce our test data to our model, it will be able to determine the survival of the passengers in that new data as well. We have survival, passenger class definitely, we have sex, and we have age. I think these four are very determinant in the survival of the passengers on that shipwreck. So I'm going to pick these four columns and neglect all the others and move on. So now basically we have inherited only four columns from our main data. Now what we have to do is split our data set into a training and a testing model. So I'm going to go back to the search field and look for a split transformation. Here we have something known as split data. I'm going to drag that here and connect it to our select columns of the data set. Now, by default on the right, you'll see the fraction of the rows being 50-50 or 0.5, but we need a 75-25 fraction. So I'm just going to put in 0.75 and make sure you have your randomized split selected. All right. Okay. With that, we have split the data into a 75-25 ratio. Our training data is 75% of our data and our test data is 25% of our data. All right. Next, we are going to go ahead and add a machine learning model, which is going to process our data. Now, understand that this part is extremely important. Here you have different machine learning models for different purposes. You have anomaly detection, evaluation, classification, clustering, scoring, so on and so forth. Because we have to classify our data into two survival bins or results, we are going to go into classification. So I'm going to go ahead and select a decision forest, which is nothing but a random forest using decision trees. So I'm just going to bring that here. Now, apart from this, you also have to use a training model. So I'll select a train model option from this. Let's just zoom out a little bit. All right. Now this train model basically takes in two inputs. So one input is going to be from the split data and the other one is going to be from our two-class decision forest. All right. Now this is basically for training our model. It's pretty self-explanatory. Now here also we will have the option to select our column. So we are going to launch the column selector and we are going to select a single column in our data set, which basically we have to predict. So here we are only going to select survived because that is our objective variable which we have to predict. And finally, we are going to score this model. So we're going to drag our score model field also here. And this is basically to score a classification or regression model, which also has two inputs, one of which we are going to get from our train model and the other one from our data. Now here is our pretty simple, pretty small model. So I'm hoping this wouldn't take too much time to run. So let's go ahead and run this entire model. As I said, it's pretty few transformations, so it's already running. And you can see it's already going through all the different assets that we've used. It's at split data, then it'll train the model, and finally it's gonna score the model. All right, it didn't take too much time. So our model has been run. So now that you can see your model has finished to run, you can right click on your score model and go look at your data set, visualize. And here you can see your first 4 columns, which are from your training data set, and your final 2 columns, which are the outputs of your model. Obviously, this is not the most accurate, but for this particular model, it will have to do. You can also go back and fix a few parameters to make your model more effective, but that beats the purpose of this particular session. So we are just going to go ahead with our integration. So now we're going to go ahead and deploy this model. I'm going to go to this option called Setup Web Service and select Predictive Web Service. Now, as this happens, you're going to see certain changes happening on your screen, certain changes happening to your model, and this entire thing getting separated into 2 tabs. One is the training experiment, and the second one is the predictive experiment. So now that we have our predictive experiments, there's some changes that I want to make. A couple of these changes later, we have a predictive experiment that looks like this. So now that we are done, we are going to go ahead and deploy this to our web service. Okay, we have to run this first. Okay, so now that we have run this, it's going to take a while. All right, now we're going to go ahead and deploy this to the web service. And this might take some time, but I assume it's not going to take a lot of time because it's not a very complicated model. So it's going to appear in our web services page like so. All right. Now you can see our published experiments in a snapshot. All right. Let's go back here. This is what our name of the experiment is. You can see the date on which it's created and the project it's been assigned to. Currently for me, I haven't assigned it to any project, so it's going to show none. And I can go ahead and add this to a project. I had created a test project earlier. So I'm just going to go ahead and add it to the test project. Yes? All right. So we are finally at the part where we are going to integrate our Azure ML model with our Power BI model. So right now I am at the query editor of Power BI. I have already imported the dataset that I had used in my Azure ML model. This is the same dataset, the same Titanic dataset. Now there are a couple of changes I need to do because I do not need so many columns. Here are a few changes Power BI does for us on its own. It promotes headers, changed our data type. So what we need to do is select these 4 columns. To do that, what you can do is click on the control key and select all these 4 columns, and then right click and choose this option, remove other columns, and that is how you will be left with these 4 columns. So this point on, what you have to do is run your R script. Now pay attention. This is the part where you actually do the integration. So you can click on run R script. And I have already run my R script, as you can see in the applied steps here. I'm just going to show you the script that I'm running. Don't worry, you will find the script and the dataset that I'm using in the description box below. Here I have to input the authentication as well as the web service ID, which you will find in your Azure Machine Learning model. So we are back to our Machine Learning Studio. Here we are at the settings page. Here you will find your workspace ID, which will be in an alphanumeric code sort of a format. Then you go to your authorization tokens and you have your primary authorization token and secondary authorization token. You can regenerate it if you like, and I'm going to keep the original one. For your service name, click on Web Services. The name of your experiment is essentially the name of your service. With that, we're going to go back to our query editor. So you have your web service ID right here. You have your authentication. You have your service name. All right. Then you're calling your Azure ML library.
And you need to download the Azure ML library using your R console or your RStudio, whichever you have. I've also done it just before the experiment. I will leave the installation code also in the description box below. It's just 2 lines, it's not very complex. And then finally, you call your workspace with your workspace ID and authentication, and then your dataset. Now we are using the term dataset because right from the beginning of using any script, this text comes in automated in any running R script or Python script dialog box where it says that dataset, the variable dataset, holds your input data for the script. So then we are going to go ahead and run it. Since I have already run it, I'm just going to go ahead and cancel it. So I'm just going to click on that step of mine where I've run the R script, and then I will get something like this. At this point, what you'll have on your left, you have your data frame, the name of your data frame, DS, as we had mentioned in our code, and on the right, you have tables. Once you expand it, you have your same outputs that you had in your Azure ML model. If you remember, you have your scored labels and you have your scored probabilities. You can go back to your Azure Machine Learning Studio and see if your scored probabilities match the ones that you have gotten there. And next, you can always close this and go ahead to your Power BI desktop and build analytics on top of it. With that, I come to the end of my Power BI Azure integration demonstration. So that was how you could consume your Azure machine learning models into Power BI and then use them for further analytics. Now, if you want more ways in which you can use the Azure Machine Learning Studio and consume the output for Power BI, do let us know in the comment section below. This was how you can use Azure Machine Learning Studio as well as R to integrate with Power BI. With that, I come to the end of my session. Thank you and have a great day.